This video is partially sponsored by Slave Chief. With Gold Hill 5, you get 5% of your order while supporting the channel. Go shop now. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are once again joined by CHALICE, a top player who
Hello.
really needs no introduction. Hi, CHALICE.
Hello. It's been a while. Last time I was here was back in, I think, right after I won Grand Asia Open. So it's been like, I think, half a year. Seems like
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
started talking with Imu, and now CHALICE will introduce us to MIHAWK,
Oh, yeah.
the new deck
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
OP14. How did the OP14 feel to you from a meta perspective?
Personally, when I first, okay, so like my first OP14 event was like my last event in the circuit. So it was Bandai Cup Fest Singapore for me. And that was like just a week after the set release. So like when it first came out for us, it was like a super wide open format. Like it's a fresh format, and we had like a week to figure things out. So in that aspect, the format was not the most fun because everyone is on the same playing field where like everyone's trying new stuff or like we're sticking to old strategies. But definitely the format is a lot wider compared to like what you see in OP13, where it's mainly just like top 3 decks, maybe the occasional Roger, yeah. So you have like Emu, Ace, Zoro, then maybe Roger here and there, I guess. But mainly just top 3. Whereas like in OP14 right now, you are like it's a lot more wide open, the format, like there's a lot more playable options. Like I mean of course you can see like recent tournament results have been like more MIHAWK dominated, but there's still a lot of like representation in terms of decks in the top cut. Yeah, so I think in terms of that, you can actually, I would say that it's quite accurate, quite an accurate depiction of the format, where like there are a lot of like playable decks, whereas like obviously like every meta will always have like the top decks. So like I guess in this format, if I were to choose like 2 decks, I would say it's Emu and MIHAWK. Yeah, but like everything else under them like is even like even Boa, I guess. Like there are a lot more decks that are viable in the format compared to in OP13, where like you only have 3 decks. Yeah, I think that's the gist of it.
And do you like more like a jungle meta or a closed one like in OP14?
I personally prefer a more closed format because I think that those are the formats where like it's more skill intensive because there will be a lot more mirrors. Then like definitely OP13 at least for me was an enjoyable format because like understanding like all the lines of play is like will give you an edge over the competition. So like I was mainly on Emu at the start, but then I transitioned over to Ace because we managed to figure out like a going first strat as Ace into Emu, and that yeah, if you can see it in my tournament results as Ace, I more or less won against most of the Emus I went first against. So it's quite a foolproof strategy that works into like the field. Of course, I don't think this strat will work against like the top emo players, but to be very honest with all of you, there's not much. So it will work into like maybe I'll say 95% of the field. So like because of that, I think OP13 like close format is more preferable for me because I feel that if you have the hours into the game and like understanding like all the lines of play for your deck as well as like all the top matchups, you will get an edge in the field. So I generally prefer formats like this. So like if I were to link it back to a format in the past, it will be maybe the first thing that came to mind would be like Sakazuki.
Okay.
So like back OP5 Sakazuki, I felt that there was quite a skill diff meta where like the better Sakazuki player will usually win. Yeah, so I like these kind of formats where like the skill difference is more apparent. Whereas like in jungle format, right, it feels more like a roulette, where like you're just going into the tournament with a deck of your choice and you're hoping you don't queue into your bad matchups. So that's the kind of format I feel OP14 is, and I generally don't really like those formats. So usually for these kind of formats, right, I tend to like what I would do is I would find a deck that has the best spreads into the field. So like in this case, it would be MIHAWK, right? So that's what I'm on for the time being. But like if you were to say maybe in the previous jungle format, which was I guess like OP10 post ban, I was on Blackbeard. So like you see like usually when it comes to more widespread formats, I tend to settle down on a deck with like better spreads into the field. Sure, I'll still have like my bad matchups, but more often than not, I'm gonna queue into like the matchups that I'm good against if I'm playing a deck with like better spreads in like overall. Yeah, I will have my bad matchups. I probably queue into like one of them throughout my entire tournament run. But sometimes if I'm the better player, I can still like get away with it. Yeah, that's OP14 and like that's generally what I prefer, right? I prefer more close formats compared to widespread formats. But I'm okay with either because I will have an approach for both. But if you ask me which one, I would say I prefer like this kind of tier 0 formats where like you only have like maybe 2 or 3 decks.
And I think that
Right.
you're not the only one, because over the past few days we have seen the Ocean Finals where MIHAWK took the top 3 spots.
Yeah.
And I like to ask you opinion on some cards choices
Right.
featured in those lists and yours. And I will start with the decision to include the 6-cost low. Do you think that it's too much of a high roll card for the deck, or would you consider it now a staple?
It's not necessarily a high roll card. It gives the decks more. It gives the MIHAWK deck more options. So when MIHAWK first came out in OP14, right? People like the traditional variant of MIHAWK is just to run like all the good green cards. So like you're just basically playing one card a turn. Like it's just a go tall strategy where you just play the highest mana card in your hand on curve every turn. So it's too much of a straightforward approach and it's easily countered. So like I think that's the reason why 6-cost law gives the deck like a breath of fresh air, because instead of just having the go tall strategy where you're just playing on curve, now the deck can also go wide. So it gives the deck more options. And like into a widespread field like OP14 where like you have to be adaptable, I think 6-cost law gives the deck that option to remain adaptable. So like against matchups that you need to go wide against, such as I guess example maybe blue decks, maybe Ace, BY Nami, like decks with strong single target removal, you want to go wide with 6-cost law and 5-cost characters. Whereas against decks like let's say maybe Emu, Yellow Boa, Yellow Luffy for example, decks without much like single target removal, then you want to go tall against them with like 7-cost Shanks. So like different matchups require you to like adapt differently. So like having 6-cost law in a deck helps solve the deck like the underlying issue of MIHAWK, which was that it struggled into decks with strong single target removal. Some traditional variants were like running 3-cost Tashigi to protect their bosses from like this single target removal. But the issue is like a lot of these single target removal decks, right? They have like some way to out the Tashigi. So like at least I don't think this is applicable for like English format right now. But like when EBO3 came out for us, BY Nami like became a thing. So like BY Nami could like play Nojiko to remove the Tashigi, then they could re-rock your boss monster. So like a lot of these decks, they don't really struggle with like queuing like 2 removal plays in one turn. So like maybe even Ace can do like at most re-rock. Yeah, something like that. And typically you only have one window to play the Tashigi as a Green MIHAWK deck. Once you miss that window, it's like every subsequent turn, like on your 5 dawn, 7 dawn, 9 dawn turn, you can't really squeeze in the Tashigi. Then somehow it's like a unsearchable card, because it doesn't have any relevant traits. It's not a slash, it's not a supernovas, it's not a... It just basically can't be picked up by any of the searches that the deck wants to run. So it's not consistent. So like because of that, even then, like a lot of decks have out to the whole go tall strategy, even if you were to see 3-cost Tashigi. So like I think that was the reason why 6-cost law is a like staple in the deck right now, because yeah, it just gives the deck a better spread into the field, because now the deck can go wide. And I personally believe, right, MIHAWK is like the new generation RG law. Having the ability to go wide is, I think, more preferred for MIHAWK also because of the leader's ability. Like the leader ability allows you to be flexible with your Dawn. So like being able to go wide means that you can be a bit more like free with your Dawn utility. So I think a going wide strategy kind of fits MIHAWK a little bit better than the go tall strategy that it sort of started with at the start. Yeah. So TLDR, I think 6-cost law is not really a high roll, it's more of a necessity for the deck.
And moving on, there's also the choice to play the 5-cost bonney. Some lists, she replaced the OP14 Perona, while in others she's included alongside her. What's your take on this? Do you think playing both makes sense, or is that choice mainly justified by the presence of low itself?
Okay, firstly, let's just start from the top. Okay, so 5-cost bonney is like the next best supernovas you can run, because if you look at all the other options you have in the green card pool, right, a lot of the 5-cost supernovas you can only narrow it down to like blocker law, 5-cost bonney, and the secret bonney that draws cards. So it's only these 3, and like out of these 3, only 5-cost like the stun bonney gives like immediate value to the deck, because it's a direct on play ability that actually affects the board or the game state. So in that aspect, it's already the preferred option among like those 3 options that I just mentioned. So it's the premier 5-drop to supplement the deck strategy together with 6-cost law. So yes, if you're running 6-cost law, you should be running more 5-drops in the deck so that you can supplement its ability to cheat out a 5-cost. Because if you're going first, you need to play a 5-cost on your 5 dawn turn. So like if you don't play enough 5-costs, right, when you play 6-cost law on your 7 dawn turn, you might not be able to cheat out another 5-cost, which will obviously make 6 cost law look like garbage, right? So you have to play more 5 cost to supplement that fact. And then 5 cost Perona is like the next best 5 drop in the deck also, because it just gives the deck so much value, especially the ability to now answer active threats. Whereas if we look at a lot of like the green card abilities, right, they all interact with like rested characters. But like in the recent inclusions, like in the recent sets at least, green has been getting like this so-called like lock ability, where like they can actually target active cards and they can't rest the next turn. So like Perona is one of those, and it can actually lock 2 characters on the board, 5 cost and below. So it's very good into like mid-range and aggro strategies. So that's what Perona is sort of there for, especially when you're playing into a meta game with like, let's say, Boa, which does have like 5 cost and below characters, and they can also potentially trigger characters as well. Yeah. Then also you have like Yellow Luffy as well, where their whole strategy, I mean, at least most of their triggers are like 5 cost and below, so you can actually mitigate aggression by stunning them. I think 5 cost Parallel is just good into almost every matchup. Cause like even in the mirror you can stun 5 cost. If the opponent is running also a 6 cost law build. Then you play into Ace also. If they don't have like Jozu or like 6 cost Ace and they play Yamato on their 6 dawn turn, you can actually lock the 4 and the 5. And then like that sort of will snowball the game in your favor, because you can just constantly keep like 2 attackers on your opponent's board locked down just by playing 1 card. And then of course she's also a sticky body. And not to mention against Emu you can also lock down the blockers and like the Saturn. Yeah, so it's just a very good card in general. I think the only bad thing about Perona is that you can't find it. Out of all the available searches that the deck will run, none of them can pick up Perona. So it's like a card you have to really like manual draw. So like because of that, I think most lists you see Perona mandatory at like 3 copies. I feel like any list that you see running less than 3 copies of Perona is probably not optimal because of what I mentioned earlier. The card you can't find it. Yeah. Talking back about 5 cost bonney. So 5 cost bonney also serves the purpose of like being able to lock down your opponent's curve, which is another part that I'll probably touch on later as the questions come. But being able to lock your opponent from playing their strongest plays on curve is very strong. I mean, if you think about like, let's say you're playing into, let's say, Ace, for example, right? If they go second, they will go to 8 dawn. When they go to their 8 dawn turn, they can actually activate the event to cheat out the 10 cost Whitebeard. So actually having bonney to keep them at 7 is also a very strong play, because you actually turn them off their curve. And in a lot of cases where like let's say the MIHAWK goes second, like when we go second, right, if we have 5 cost bonney, we actually flip the switch on the opponent, because instead of them now being able to play their 7 drop, right, now they're locked at 6, they can't play a 7 drop. So like effectively it reverses the turn order back to us, because now we have the initiative. Same can be said in the mirror. If we were to stun them at 8 dawn, then they can't play their 9 cost MIHAWK, and then we get to be the first to play 9 cost MIHAWK. So playing 5 cost bonney in the deck helps you to reverse like the initiative, where like which the player going first will usually have, because they will be the first to play a 7 cost Shanks, first to play a 9 cost MIHAWK. Yeah, but if I have bonney, I can reverse that order.
And to wrap up the question about decklist, I wanted to ask you about the inclusion of the 1 cost green OP13 event, which the name is too long to say it. Against which matchup do you feel this card is the most impactful?
I usually just term this card Luffy stun event, because that is literally what it is, right? So
I saw a post calling it the Frost Nova from Erson.
Oh yeah, that's also a section in my guide. Yeah, but yeah, this deck can also do a Frost Nova combo with like all the stun pieces, but yeah. Okay, so yeah, I term this card Luffy stun event is the easiest way I can term it. So this card is insane. It's good into almost everything in the meta, you name it. It's good into mirror, you can stun like anything below like 7 cost Shanks and below you can stun. So like you just use 1 card to buy yourself like more than 1 card. Because usually what you're stunning is like 6k characters or more. You're saving yourself a lot of cards just by being able to lock your opponent's 2 characters down. It's good into yellow, because like they jump triggers, right? So like you don't need to be afraid of triggers if you have this card. Because after they swing with the characters that they trigger, right, you can just keep them locked down. So it allows you to play a little bit more aggressively, in the sense that you can push their face while keeping their board locked down, which is the unfair part about MIHAWK, by the way. I don't think I mentioned this, but the unfair thing about MIHAWK, right, is that you can develop and push. And then couple this with like the variety of like stun effects that you have, you can do that all the while keeping your opponent unable to play the game. So that's the unfair part about MIHAWK. So yeah, then coming back to talking about the event, yeah, it's also good into Ace, especially into Ace. This matchup, this card is an MVP, because usually Ace, right, they will want to play a mid-range game into Green MIHAWK, because if they play for their big drops like the blocker beard, right, if the MIHAWK responds with let's say Lord Beppo, right, the game is almost over immediately. Because why? Firstly, if they play Blocker Beard and I respond with Lord Beppo, right, firstly I stun the Blocker Beard. So the Blocker Beard cannot block any of my attacks this turn. Then when it comes back to their turn, right, the Blocker Beard cannot attack because it's still stunned. Then when it comes back to my turn, the Blocker Beard is still rested. So I get off another wave of attacks into him. So I get to effectively like slap him 2 times while he cannot do anything with the Blocker Beard. So if I'm able to play, if the game plays out like that, right, the MIHAWK will always win. If the ace decides to play Blocker Beard. So usually against MIHAWK, they will opt to go for like a more mid-range game plan, which is where this card comes in. Cause the Luffy stun event can target 7 cost and below cards, right? This effectively shuts down any attackers the ace can have on the board. So it buys you like entire turns to go into Emu as well. Cause like you can stun the Nujuro, you can stun like the blocker or like whatever attackers they have on the board also. And then like yeah, like what you said earlier, you can actually Frost Nova the Emu's board. So like I wrote this in my guide, but like so the Frost Nova combo is basically you have 9 cost MIHAWK on the board. So then you swing with the 9 cost MIHAWK. So let's say after they do their whole 5 elders play, right? So they have 5 characters on the board. So you swing with MIHAWK, you target 1 blocker, you lock it, right? So that's 1 character that's stunned already. Then you play Perona to lock the 2/4 cost. So that's 2. Then if they don't have any rested characters on the board, you can actually activate DMG to rest the remaining 2 characters. Then you play the Luffy stun event. So that you lock all 5 characters. Yeah, so you actually stun all 5 characters on the board. Yeah. So this is the Frost Nova combo that I had promoted in my guide against the Emu matchup. But yeah, this is something you can do that this card opens up. But generally, if you are able to use this card to stun 2 characters, it's already a very big tempo swing because you're effectively using 1 card to buy yourself an entire turn. And it's only just 3 Dawn, which is easy for MIHAWK because your leader effect activates 3 Dawn. Very strong card, especially when you can get it off. Yeah. And also it's like a supernova, so like you can actually find it. And in the worst case, it's still a tricky counter. So this card offers a lot of utility for the deck.
We can talk about the matchups. We
Sure.
just end up talking about talking trash about Ace, so why don't we start with that? At the time, Ace was heavily unfavorable against Zoro due to multiple attacks and the ability to deal with blockers through spells. Can we say MIHAWK is an upgrade over Zoro? Therefore, that matchup is now the unfavorable one for Ace?
I think fundamentally different decks. MIHAWK and Zoro are a little bit different. Zoro has more emphasis on pressure. Zoro is more of an aggressor, like initiator kind of deck, whereas MIHAWK can play both, can sort of a little bit more flexible. Like it can sort of do both things at once, but it's not particularly as strong as an aggressor compared to Green Zoro, right?
Yeah,
but MIHAWK has more
Zoro and Bonney, we can say.
Yeah, a little bit of a balance between the two, I would say. Yes, correct. Yeah, so MIHAWK has a bit more flexibility in that it can adapt to more matchups because of like the assortment of tools they access to. I mean, just having the ability to restand 3 Dawn to do whatever you want is sort of insane to begin with. So it kind of does that as well, because Zoro also develops and applies pressure. Like when they play Tashigi, they do that, right? Develop and pressure. So MIHAWK also does that. I would say in that aspect, MIHAWK is sort of the same, but a little bit different because MIHAWK is also can be a bit more of a reactive deck as well, like Green Bonney. So like yeah, like what you said, sort of a baby between the two, I guess. So I think the matchup for, like I mentioned earlier, I think this matchup is MIHAWK favored for sure. Because if the ace decides to play mid-range against you, which they usually would, your mid-range counters their mid-range, because your mid-range can keep their board stunned. Then if they decide to Hail Mary and play 10 cost black blocker beard, then you just answer your Lord Beppo and the game is over. So you see, like no matter which direction the ace tries to take the game, you will win. As long as you have the answer prepared. Yeah. So that's what it comes down to. If you run a perfect script against a perfect script, let's say the ace sees everything they need and the MIHAWK sees everything they need, the MIHAWK will always come out ahead, because the MIHAWK always is able to react to the ace. Yeah, so I would say the matchup is quite MIHAWK favored. Coupled with the fact that you can like easily hit them for 8k every turn. And if you have Tashigi on board, it's like 2 8ks every turn. So it's like asking 4 cards from the ace. So even if they use their leader effect and take the life, they still have to shit out the 2 cards that they just gained. So in that aspect, I think it's a fundamentally favored matchup.
And talking about the old kings of the format, we can continue by talking about Emu. With access to cards that are hard to remove along with oppressive threats like Shanks, MIHAWK and Low and Beppo, this matchup is often considered favorable for MIHAWK. What's your opinion on this matchup?
I think this matchup is definitely MIHAWK favored, but I would think that a good Emu can win against a subpar Emu, like MIHAWK player. Like if the MIHAWK player is not that good, I think a good emu player can capitalize on the gaps to actually cheese out a win. So like, what I mean by this is like a good MIHAWK player will know when to turn their board. So like especially when you play the first 7 cost shanks, sometimes a good MIHAWK player will recognize that if they know that they cannot defend the 7 cost shanks from like a Nuzuro gem, right, they will keep the 7 cost shanks active. Yeah, whereas like maybe a not so good MIHAWK player will rest the shanks immediately. Then next turn the emu player will just respond with like jamming with the Nuzuro into the shanks, and then the shanks dies. And then the MIHAWK player will sort of lose from there. Yeah. So I think there will be gaps that a good emu player can capitalize, but for sure if like it's a good MIHAWK player that knows what he's doing, then it's hard for the emu player to punish any mistakes if they can't even find any mistakes to begin with. So I think in order for emu to win this matchup, one, the MIHAWK needs to not see the curve. Two, the MIHAWK needs to make mistakes somewhere for them to capitalize on. So in that sense, it's quite an unfavored matchup because like with the existence of shanks alone, it sort of turns off like a lot of pressure that the emu player can put out just by applying the passive 1k onto the board. And with shanks on the board, the emu player can no longer play around low beppo by like keeping their entire board active or like transforming, swinging with the Nuzuro, and then using leader ability to pop the Nuzuro so that their board will always be like active characters. Because low beppo, in order to get the 2k base, right, the opponent needs to have 2 rested characters on the board. So when they have shanks, right, this condition will always be fulfilled. Because the shanks will attack and rest 1 card, then the low beppo gets played and rest another card. Yeah, so when this happens, then yeah, it's a bit hard for the emu player to really react in that sense. And also like, I think even if they don't see like 7 cost shanks, they can also just like play 6 cost law with 5 cost Perona, then Luffy stun event, 9 cost MIHAWK, Frost Nova. MIHAWK have a lot of ways to play into the emu matchup, whereas the emu needs to capitalize on mistakes. I think this matchup is MIHAWK favored. Yeah, though I think a good emu can win against a not so good MIHAWK, if that makes sense.
We can close the old meta by moving on to the new one, starting with Boa. It's a deck that can be very dangerous thanks to the high number of triggers in life and ability to close game with the 9 cost Boa combined with Perfume, which become 20k unblockable. How do you approach this matchup in particular?
Generally, you don't have to deal with the 20k unblockable because your bosses can keep their 9 cost Boa locked. Like 9 cost MIHAWK can lock the Boa down, 10 cost low beppo can lock the Boa down. So generally, you don't have to deal with like this kind of unfair numbers. But most importantly in this matchup, you need to like damage control is important. Like knowing when to preserve your life total, knowing when to take life. I think this is all very important when playing into Boa because every life sort of counts. And some turns, instead of like generally One Piece, you want to try to take 1 life every turn. But sometimes when you play against Boa, you want to stay at your current life total so that you can actually open yourself up to contest their board. So that even if they proc their leader effect, right, they are still pinging 1 life only. So total, you will still take 1 life across 2 turns compared to if you were to take 1 life the previous turn, and then you chase board this turn, then they ping you another life, and then you take 2 life across 2 turns. So that's bad. Yeah, so like knowing how to navigate like your life total is very important in this matchup. And also knowing when you can afford to play into triggers, because sometimes early on you don't swing, so that you can play around them potentially triggering. Sometimes even though they never fix their life, you also can't really you can't risk swinging, and then if they trigger a trigger character, you fall behind from there. So really need to evaluate like when you can and cannot attack. That's the most important concept when you play into Boa. Not just for MIHAWK, I think for any deck in general. This is just fundamentals. Yeah, but generally it's not that bad of a matchup because you do have all the tools you need to control their board. Like you have Perona, you have Luffy stun event, and if they play for their bosses, like if they play 9 cost Boa, you can even just play low beppo in response to base up to 7k while keeping the Boa locked down. And even if they were to like jam for like 17 with the Kuma, for example, the MIHAWK deck generally runs a lot of like counter events which help you get out of the attacks. So definitely it's not that bad of a matchup as long as you're able to map out like the turns well. But generally this matchup will come down to like 6 turns usually. The game will end in like 6 turns more often than not. It's quite a fast-paced matchup, but the idea is to not let them snowball in the early to mid game. Then because they are 4 life leader, it's not that hard for you to clock them down also. So usually maybe early to mid game you don't let them trigger characters. Then once you have a board set up, you can like try to burst them like at least 2 life in 1 turn, that kind of shit, just to put pressure on them. And you can probably close the game by turn 6 usually. Yeah, and DMG is quite a strong card in this matchup because it allows you to rest the blocker boa and also their Dawn, which turns off Slave Arrow, and even the one cost boa event in OP14.
Another OP14 matchup that we need to talk about is of course the mirror match. Which card are you usually looking for, and when do you feel like you are ahead compared to your opponent?
I think this is quite fundamentally, it's a green mirror. This is a traditional green mirror since way back in OP01, where like the resource management is the most important as well as initiative. So what I mean by initiative is like being the first to sort of decide the tempo of the game. So usually the player going first will have the advantage because you get to be the first to always play like the first threat. So on 5 dawn you get to play the first 5 cores, on 7 dawn you get to play the first 7 cores, on 9 dawn you get to play the first 9 cores. So you always be the first in all these aspects. So in this mirror, the most important cards will be your big drops. Yeah, because all of your big drops respond to something on the board. So like 9 cost MIHAWK can stun something, 10 cost Lord Pepper can stun something. Like they're all able to sort of pseudo remove something on the board, which is a pretty big tempo swing. So yes, your big drops are the most important cards in this matchup, and being able to be the first to slam the big cards down is, I think, what will determine the matchup more often than not. But of course, another card that can sort of weave in a gap in this mirror will be 5 cost bonney, the stun bonney, where like you can turn off your opponent's Dawn, like stun their Dawn so that they cannot play the next play on curve. So for example, if they play a 5 on 5, next time they're going up to 7, I can actually play bonney to keep them at 6 so that they can't play 7 cost shanks. Or like I think I mentioned this earlier also, but if they were to go up to 9, I can keep them at 8 so that they can't play for the 9 cost MIHAWK. Then it allows me to reverse the initiative because instead of them now being able to play 9 cost MIHAWK, I will be the first one to play mine. And that will put me ahead in the game because now if I have a second big drop to follow up, right, the game will come to a point where like because I'm the first to play a big drop down on the board, my opponent will always be one big drop behind me. Then I'll be leading the race in that scenario. So I think this mirror comes down to initiative. And like, of course, if you're the player going second and your opponent is able to play the first big drop because you can't stop him from doing that, then your responsibility is to make sure that they don't get to do it comfortably. So when they are about to play their 9 cost MIHAWK, for example, maybe you just hit them harder so that even if they were to play 9 cost MIHAWK, they wouldn't be in a comfortable position to stabilize with the 9 cost MIHAWK. Yeah. So it's a fight for initiative. Like whoever gets to play the first big drop, you will generally be ahead. Yeah, then after that it's usually just big drop trading where like just like chaining Lord Apples onto each other. And usually the game will end like after the second or third Lord Apple. Yeah. Then mirror gaps also can be like some of the restand events where like if you're the first to play Lord Apple, right, and you base up your leader, your opponent can't really play around the restand events because they need to base up and apply pressure on you. So they will have to play Lord Apple first before activating their leader effect so that they will have the Dawn to contest you. So being the first to play Lord Apple has a innate advantage because you base up your leader first, right, your opponent has to attack. They have to put a pressure on you. So because they have to attack you, they will play into like Waterfall and Spiderweb. So if they play Lord Apple and target something on your board, you can actually reactive the card that they targeted. And then next turn you can actually attack with the card. Yeah. So that's another mirror sort of edge that you can get, which is the restand events. Yeah, but generally this matchup comes down to who is the first to do certain things. So initiative is the most important concept in the mirror.
Then the last deck I'd like to discuss is UP, Luffy, which has gained popularity after the Roger promo, of course, and the recent World Championship qualification in Asia. How do you approach this matchup?
I think this matchup is generally a coin flip. If you play this matchup like a normal MIHAWK deck, you definitely cannot win. Because now all the UP lists are popularized to run like 9 cost MIHAWK, Red Rock. So they are actually very strong into decks that play 1 card a turn. So like if you play 7 cost Shanks and it gets answered by 9 cost MIHAWK, you almost lose the game immediately. Yeah, so you can't play for a go tall strategy against UP Luffy. So you have to go for a go white strategy with 6 cost Law. MVP in this matchup is definitely 5 cost Tashigi. Because firstly, it's a threat that they cannot remove. And being an 8k attacker with his ability to base itself up is very strong because 8k is a magic number into UP Luffy, especially in the early game. So like if you can do multiple 8k swings into them, you're able to clock their life very fast. Then, like, at least in my experience playing the UP Luffy, some games end on like my first 9 or 10 dawn turn. Because I managed to clock them down to like 1 or 0 life. And then right after they play like their Sanji into like 9 cost MIHAWK or 8 cost Roger, right, I can just immediately DMG them down to rest their last dawn and then just go for game there. Because if they're tapped out, they need raw counter. And generally, if they haven't started if they haven't been cycling giants or they haven't used their leader effect, right, for multiple times, their hand hasn't been sculpted yet. So their hand usually be full of bricks. So usually the idea in this matchup is to try to go as fast as possible. Try to just go wide with multiple Tashigis if possible, like play Tashigi on 5, then 6 law into Tashigi on 7. That will apply the most amount of pressure on them. Then you can just try to DMG and close the game the moment they play their first like Sanji. Yeah. Then of course if the game progresses and goes a little bit later, right, you want to force them in a spot, right, like they always have to use Red Rock to answer your big drop. And the good thing about this is that they cannot base up when they do this. So they cannot play, like they can't play A-Cost Roger and Red Rock at the same time. So they have to choose one or the other. So they're not developing their board when they Red Rock. And also their leader still stays on 6k, means you can easily bully them the next turn. And they also can't attack with their board also, because if you play a big drop the last turn like a MIHAWK or Lord Beppo, right, means you stun one like a character on their board. So let's say they played Sanji and play another big body. You play 9-cost MIHAWK to lock one of the big bodies. Next time if they Red Rock, right, only the one big character can attack. So it's not putting a lot of pressure on you. So this matchup also need to damage control so that you can allow them to use the, like you can soak the 9k swings with your life. Yeah, but generally you want to bring the game into a state where you can always just threaten Lito on them with DMG. Because once they tap out, right, it's go time already usually. If you are able to like burst them down from a certain life threshold. So early pressure is important in this matchup. So that you can bring, so that they don't feel as comfortable to play for their power spikes. Because imagine they play their 9-cost Sanji, because they reach their first 10 down turn, then they play 9-cost Sanji into, let's say, Roger. They go up to 8k. But if they're at one life with like 3-4 cards in hand or 5 cards, you can just DMG and split 2-way and maybe kill them. Yeah. So they don't feel too comfortable tapping out against MIHAWK generally. Also because MIHAWK has one of the strongest DMG turns in the game because of your leader ability to reset your Dawn. So like it's somewhat similar to GP Luffy in the past where like your DMG only costs like 1 Dawn. So like you still have a lot of Dawn to threaten Lito on the opponent. Whereas if you compare it to like Green Zoro in the past, the DMG isn't as strong because for Green Zoro, when you use DMG, you need to rest 4 Dawn. And if you don't have Cavendish on the board, you only are left with 6 Dawn to work with for the turn. Yeah, whereas for MIHAWK, this is a completely different ball game. Yeah, so TLDR against UP Luffy, you want to be aggressive into them so that you're able to threaten Lito onto them with DMG when they tap out. If the game goes later, you want to play your big drops to force them to respond to you by using Red Rock, so that they don't base up and then they're still in perfect range for you to try and kill them.
Perfect. That's everything for today's video. I'd like to thank you, Chalice, for your time.
No
you
problem.
can find all of his social links in the description below. And bye!